And so I think probably a lot of Christians are not born again. And I think I have had some things that I would call spiritual experiences, but pretty sure I'm not born again either, because I don't buy the idea that it just comes down to praying a sinner's prayer. You know, people talk about that like it's this mystical thing that's that whole transaction, which I mean, I get the idea, like if you believe that this is a real presence that is there ready to respond to your heart's cry, then you know you're imagining this being an invisible hand that's already reaching out, and all you have to do is take it. But that doesn't explain the apathy that I've seen in the church, because it's one thing to have this idea of a supreme being to turn to when you're in trouble, and it's one thing to have your devotions on a daily basis, and maybe that does something to help you to feel more stable. But if your life, for instance, if your life is still really focused on yourself and if whatever focus you do give toward others is to get them to join your religion, you know, if the time, the quote unquote quality time that you spend with other people is spent with you preoccupied over how you could change their minds, I don't think that's the fruit the early church was aiming for, or that Jesus was aiming for. It's the stuff that he went around doing according to the Bible. It was stuff that made an unmistakable connection with people. Not just a connection in the sense of knowing that someone was really present with you while they were interacting with you, but a connection that resulted in helping other people to connect their own dots on the inside. And you remember the woman at the well, Jesus talking with her and knowing things. Which, by the way, this idea of a unified field, this idea of one single source, that's the kind of thing that if you could tap into, why wouldn't you be able to see things that you shouldn't rationally be able to know? I mean, like, why wouldn't we have psychics and mediums, prophets? Why wouldn't we have people with dreams and visions if we live in a world that is far more connected than we ever thought possible? We see physical distance. This hand can't reach this hand, and so we think, well, these aren't connected. And yet the same energy is powering them both. Just like how the distance between subatomic particles that are part of a larger solid mass, that separation is kind of an illusion. But if you were small enough so that you saw the gaps between subatomic particles that are holding these things together through energy fields, maybe you would think they were separated. And I think the same is probably true of stars and constellations. We just have a human-sized perspective on the universe. It's probably true all the way up and true all the way down, that this is how it all works. But of course, it's crazy to try to come to terms with any of it. But where was I? Oh, yeah. So if your life is kind of still self-focused, you've missed it. In a nutshell, that's the conclusion that I've come to. If community is not a priority, then you're probably still not there yet. You're probably still not actually following Jesus, even if there are bad things that you don't do. Probably the Sermon on the Mount is a good starter guide. In fact, I have a feeling that's what the point of it was. It sure seemed to be Jesus's manifesto for a social revolution. You know, that idea of blessing those who curse you. It's like if enough people started forgiving everyone all the time, then that sort of thing might be contagious in a way that would actually bring transformation to an entire society. It's a lot to think about, especially when, even at the time of this video, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, we're living in a time where world powers have enough weaponry to destroy the planet many times over. And if we don't have a redemptive social revolution, we may face annihilation. So if this concept of being born again is even real, then I hazard a guess that it is not only real, but potent enough that you can tell when you've encountered it in someone. Not because they make you want to join their social club, but because you know they have something and that you want in on it because of wholeness, because of a purpose or a mission worth living for, because of it being life-giving, not controlling, not manipulative, but generative. This one went kind of deeper than I expected to go. I wanted to keep it from being too wandering. I know I touched on a bunch of different things, but I like to think I held it together and kept it on theme well enough. I didn't think I would make this many episodes when I started this. I just knew that I'd reached a point where I needed to start processing this stuff out loud. And YouTube is a funny place for it, partly because, it's not just automatic to be able to build a following on YouTube these days. And so there's this weird, at the same time, it's me sharing very personal things in a very public space, and yet at the same time, it's kind of not, because barely anybody's seeing it. So I've definitely shared a lot of things that I wouldn't at all have felt comfortable bringing up at a family gathering. Still wouldn't. But that was a big part of it, feeling the bondage. Bondage is a good word for what this has been. The bondage of feeling the weight of expectations, not expectations so much in terms of what loved ones expect you to do, but at least in terms of what they expect you not to do. Imagine if you can remember playing bumper bowling when you were a kid. Well, imagine if all of life were set up like bumper bowling, and you weren't allowed to make certain mistakes or errors because they were just simply roped off. Having a gutter ball was literally off limits. You couldn't do it if you tried to do it. And so there's so many things that become self-maintaining in a system simply because you don't want to lose your sense of belonging, and you'd lose your sense of belonging if you deviated from what you knew your people took to be a given. Of course Jeremy's going to do that, or Jeremy's going to believe that, things like that. I don't suppose I need to explain this at length, because if you've watched through this many episodes, I would say there's a fair chance that you've been through this process or in this process as well. I would expect that you have some frame of reference for what those social pressures entail. And at some point, I just knew, like I've said before, the anger that was in me that kind of didn't have a healthy outlet. For a good while, I was running a lot, and that was a great way to get some of that energy out. But there was a lot that was just pent up, and it, how it messes with your insides when you have just a lot that's pent up, and And it's not just feeling hard done by, but it's also just confusion. It's like, well, I need to play this tape to the end. I need to reckon with all of this stuff that just didn't add up. And at some point, your life has to become your life. Because, like, I mean, look, even if we're members of one large body, each member still has to be allowed to perform the function that that member is designed for. And that function might not be the same from the beginning of the developmental process to the end of it. It could look different over the course of time. One very interesting thing that I don't have sources to cite for was that passage, I think was it in Exodus when Moses with the burning bush, that phrase when he asks God's name and gets the answer from the burning bush, I am that I am. I have heard that another way of reading the same original text translates to, I will be what I will be, which falls in line with a little what I shared from those scriptural passages at the beginning of this Born Again video. That idea that the Spirit is like the wind, it goes where it will. If the religion you always held to growing up was the thing you held to because it was predictable and it felt like something that would give you stability, but on the other side of the same coin was something that would remain predictable enough to allow you to keep a comfort zone, then the idea that all of this, down to that quantum level, is powered by a spirit that will be whatever it will be, and that maybe life can't be a list of rules because maybe a lot more is subject to change than you thought it was, and maybe that's not a moral issue. Maybe that's just the nature of reality. Maybe some things are different in different times. Well, no, I'm not going to pretend that that's a comfortable thing. However, if it's something or someone that you can connect in relationship with, then maybe you can leave your comfort zone without having to leave your sense of stability. Because if you've ever had a loved one who walked through difficult things with you, you know that the fact that they were in your corner trumped the fact of how difficult the circumstances were. I don't know if I'm going to have much more to add to this series. I'm not even sure there's more beyond this episode. Maybe there will be occasionally. Or maybe I'll move on to something just as spiritual, just as introspective, but somewhat different. And it's somewhat different thematically. I could see that happening. But let me at least say that of all the things I'm still not sure about, I believe that there is so much more beyond the superficial layer of reality that we are so used to functioning in and even evaluating things by. I mean, even the fact that on shows and in social media, entry level, just being okay with yourself kind of means needing to look flawless, right? So yeah, we're up against a lot in terms of getting past even superficial self-evaluation to do spiritual introspection and developing spiritual connectedness, right? But I'm glad that I've done these, partly because it does so much just to be able to speak out loud about your own experiences and process things and lay old things to rest. Like I said, let the tape run through to the end. You can lay old things to rest. And it's like dusting cobwebs and moving old boxes out of the attic. It's like, now there's room for other stuff. There's room for new thoughts and new ideas. And if you're one of the few who even found your way to this video series, I hope that it's meant something to you. For me, it's been worthwhile even for my own sake, because these are things that I've needed to process. But I've made these videos in such a way as to be mindful of, others going through similar experiences. And it means a lot to have representation. If you've been in a place in your life where what you've held on to for your sense of stability and your sense of belonging seems to have the bottom fall out of it, seems to maybe be a cardboard cutout instead of the real thing. It is not any fun to be in no man's land and not even be able to speak the language. So, thank you for being here with me in this sort of nowhere place, in what I've often called the middle ground. It's kind of like being in an airport, right? When you're on your way from some place to someplace else, and maybe you're not even sure where. I hope this has brought you some amount of validation on whatever your journey is. And I want to encourage you to recognize that you can handle change. You can handle change. And I would say a deciding factor that makes you able to handle change is that there will be a reason that you lay hold of whatever change that happens to be. And may that be from a place of authenticity and from recognizing that there's a real connection and a sense of belonging and something life-giving mutually in that, rather than it being from a place of fear or desperation leading you to just choose some new authority for you to submit to. You are never going to meet someone who's more important than you. We're all parts of the same superorganism. There's gonna just be a lot of unfolding to do. So get busy with that potential.